So hello and welcome to another event hosted by the Cambridge University Social Impact and Sustainability Society, or as we call ourselves, CUSISS. Today, we are thrilled to host a fireside chat with Dr. Mandeep Rai, where we would be discussing her book, The Values Compass. My name is Navin Seeterram, Social Impact Director and Events Director at CUSISS, and I'm ever so pleased to be your humble host and moderator for today's session. This event is being recorded and will be available to you on our YouTube channel. And for our students of the Cambridge Judge Business School, you will be pleased to know that today's session will be uploaded to the VLE for your learning purposes. In proceeding with today's session, please bear with me as we cover some housekeeping items. If you haven't already done so, please ensure that your mics are muted for the duration of the session. The fireside chat will run for 30 minutes, after which I will open up the floor for the Q&A with Mandeep. I will moderate the Q&A, which will last 20 minutes. And also please be aware that the general chat box won't be used for getting questions to the panel. Questions to our guests must be sent directly to Nikki Shah, my co-moderator, via the chat. Just look for her name, Nikki Shah, select it, and type your question to her in there. I will then receive those questions and pass them on to Mandeep accordingly. We promise we will do our very best to get at as many questions as we can, finishing up at just about 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Now I am pleased to pass you on to the main event. But before I do so, let me tell you a few words about our founder and president, Mr. Michael Williams. Michael is the founder and managing director of Highguard Capital, and he's one of the world's best performing hedge fund managers of the past decade. He's also the founder and executive director of a US-based nonprofit called Oasis, which also focuses on ESG principles. Michael will invite our CUSISS governance director, Dr. Eelco Fiole, as well as our featured guest, Dr. Mandeep Rai, to start the fireside chat. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Navin, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. So today's event is a conversation about values. We are very lucky today that our featured guest is an expert in that field. I'll tell you more about her shortly, but first let me briefly introduce our society's own expert in ethics and governance, Dr. Eelco Fiole. Eelco is our society's governance director, the G in ESG, and as I mentioned, he is a highly regarded expert in ethics and corporate governance. He's the co-founder and managing partner of Alpha Governance Partners, which provides risk governance to boards in the investment management and fintech industries. He earned a PhD in economics from the University of Basel, and he is an adjunct professor in finance ethics at the universities of Lausanne and Neuchâtel. In addition to that, he's finishing up a master's degree in social innovation from the University of Cambridge. Welcome, Eelco. Thank you for joining us today. And next, please allow me to introduce our featured guest, Dr. Mandeep Rai. Dr. Rai is a global authority on values, and she is the author of the international best-selling book, The Values Compass, which I encourage all of you to purchase and read immediately. This is it. She has traveled to over 150 countries researching the values inherent in the many different cultures of the world. Her professional experience ranges from broadcast journalism to venture capital, to working for the United Nations, the European Commission, and several NGOs. She has a PhD in global values, a master's degree in development from the London School of Economics, and an MBA from the London Business School, which included a year in the States at Harvard Business School and MIT. And if that wasn't enough, she is also our first guest who has had an audience with both Borat, his alter ego is actually a Cambridge graduate, and the Dalai Lama. Yes, the Dalai Lama, who also endorsed her book. So you can't get much better than that on an endorsement. So welcome, Dr. Rai. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. So on to what we're talking about today. We are focusing on values, which seems like a simple enough topic. But when you start discussing it, you realize the concept is enormous and can lead down thousands of different paths of conversation. So for the sake of time, we want to sort of venture down a few of those paths that help everyone on this event discover and understand both their own values and how to better understand the values of others who we may not be that familiar with. And ultimately, use that newfound knowledge to become better leaders and contributors in the social impact and sustainability space. I know we're all excited to hear Mandeep's insights on this topic. Eelco and I flipped a coin to see who would have the honor of asking her the first question, and Eelco won. So Eelco, over to you to kick things off.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. And thanks, Mandeep, for joining. As we speak, there are currently many books being published which talk about subjects around values, including Mark Carney's recently, values, social sustainability, purpose. We had Alex Edmonds speaking of the London Business School, and so on. So in this landscape of all these authors and all these books, where would you locate your book?
It's funny that you should say that there's so many books on values, because actually when my book came out, and these books have kind of come out around the same time, if not earlier. There aren't that many books on values. If we think about the landscape of ethics or purpose or mission, there's definitely many. But values, few, looking specifically at global values or organizational values more so. But I found that those books tend to be a little bit more textbook-esque. And this idea of taking you around the world and showing you values from different places, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this might be the only one.
Well, I'm certain that you've done the studies, so to be able to locate that. Mike, would you have a follow-up question on this one?
So yeah, how would you, we've had a long conversation of cultural, what develops as a culture versus just inherent values of individuals. Do you see can you help define like a line between a person's values and where it becomes a cultural thing, to when you think about a specific geographical area, as you describe in your book, that all the different countries that you mentioned, where you can maybe partially define. Of course, we can't label any country or any culture as they are all like this and only like this, but where does it go from individual values into a cultural definition? And I think that goes along with Eelco's question of like, where does this fall into the lineage of from individual values up to cultural, up to the differences between those broader cultures?
Well, you're very right in saying that you could never say that one particular culture is one specific way, or indeed it's the same for individuals. You wouldn't say one person has X value or Y value. So if I take the macro version first, the cultures first, although every value exists in every place, just like every value exists in all of us human beings, what a culture pivots into or evolves into or becomes is still quite distinct and different from another culture. So for example, if I think about right now, I'm sitting in the Isle of Wight, being on an island surrounded by water, being on quite a small island, being such that the people here have not necessarily, although they've had exposure, a lot of exposure, and feel quite controlled by the rest of the United Kingdom, they don't feel necessarily part of the rest of Europe that they're surrounded in. So right here, right now, I can sense how the geography, but also the history of the place has meant that people have evolved in a certain direction. And then, as well as geography and history, it will become kind of many years of societal movement or evolvement. So I've just come back from Western Africa 10 days ago, having passed all the PCRs and come out of quarantine. And I have found that there, for example, it being more Mauritania, which was much more kind of, I would say, Europe facing or Arab facing than other parts of Africa. Mali, which is right next door, which is landlocked, already you could see a completely different value set just because of the geography. And then all the other layers are on top of that. So it feels quite organic when we're thinking about a country's value system. When we're thinking about an individual's value system, it's a little bit more, I mean, the fact is that we could all be a number of different values, and it's a choice. So further on in this conversation, we'll talk about how do you choose your values, or are they just a reflection of where you're sitting? Partly yes, partly you can't but help be influenced by the culture and the society that you're surrounded by, but thereafter it's a choice.
So picking up on what Mike has said in terms of particularly the point of organizational values, let me ask you this question. If we look at the reality of many that many of our audience here faces, how can individual and organizational values best provide direction in a multinational organization across regions and across cultures? Are they conflicting, or how would you go about that?
I think they're two slightly different things. So a multinational might choose, and actually very good multinationals do choose, a specific set of values. So let's say you're Levi Strauss, and you might look at originality or innovation or endurance or history and heritage. There are finite, normally we take a balance of from 3 to 5, like 5 balanced values that identify or are part of your culture, that you have decided are part of your culture, that are recognized and rewarded throughout. And really it's almost your DNA of your organization. But then your question is broadened to, but what about the fact that you're a multinational and you're working across lots of geographies? Then is there a conflict? I think right now, especially as, you know, if we're looking at this conversation, many people have joined the conversation from many different parts of the world, and it's similar to our business life. We are having Zoom calls with team members in Latin America, and in the same team, there'll be people from Africa and there'll be people from Europe, etc. And that might not have happened pre-COVID as much unless it was a deliberate gathering. But now it seems a common practice that almost every call seems to be very global. So as a multinational, are we then finding it difficult to stress our company values vis-a-vis the kind of cultural or national values that we are facing? And I would say actually that having a clear set of company values or organizational values helps you navigate or bridge the cultural nuances that you then face. So originality or innovation. If you have decided as an organization that this is important to you, then no matter whether you're sitting in Peru and Peru's positivity will be brought into that innovation, or whether you're sitting in Bhutan, where the emphasis is on personal and global happiness. In fact, just recently, just a few days ago, Prince Philip passed away, and thousands of candles were lit by the King of Bhutan in this sense of wanting to think about global happiness and remembering the prince and thinking about how can we contribute to something that's happened on the other side of the world. So even though a company might be thinking about innovation, a person from each of their nations will bring their own slant towards innovation from wherever they're sitting. I hope you get the gist, otherwise I can elaborate further or explain that further.
Yeah, I would appreciate a little bit further elaboration. What I can imagine is that a conflict could arise where the person that has puts value on avoiding risk, is joining this innovative company. And would it clash then, or how would we navigate, if you will, that difference?
So if the company is standing for innovation and they've just hired someone for whom avoiding risk is really important, firstly, if a company really knows their value set, would they hire someone like that? Or indeed, would they identify that trait or that value quite early on, even in the interview stage? What I find is that when a company becomes really clear about its values, then the people that they hire, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The products they make, the services they choose to focus on, or even their supply chain, the whole entire ecosystem begins to reflect those values. So kind of an automatic cleansing bias, if you will, takes place, where these conflicts or problems arise less than a company that hasn't defined its values. You find that if you haven't defined your values and you're marching towards a particular goal or mission or destination, but you have never, one, defined them, or more importantly, communicated them to either your team or your HR or your, your entire organization, then yes, these conflicts arise much more. And it's a painful process. I hope we haven't experienced this, but many of us have experienced being hired into an organization or seeing someone hired into an organization and then seeing that they don't really fit, or that they would be better suited in a different type of an organization. To avoid that, whether you're a startup or whether you're a huge multinational, define your values. And you have a much, this is why the Dalai Lama said that this philosophy or this book or this emphasis on values leads to harmony. It really does, because you're much more aware of what's important to you or what you stand for, and then everything begins to resemble that.
Right. So what advice would you give an organization that's moving into a new country to implement a business model that has worked in the past? In business school, we overemphasized, we were taught that there's so many multinationals that it works great, let's say in the United States, so let's replicate it everywhere. And then they go to a place like China or India and it just fails miserably because they make no effort to understand the values and the culture. They hire very few people locally. And if they do, they're in subservient roles. So you have a guy that looks like me that drops into Delhi that is telling everybody what to do, and that may or may not work. And if I have no idea about the values of the people that I'm speaking to, I'm going to probably, it's a roll of the dice with the odds against me in that. So as an organization, be it a business or even a nonprofit that wants to expand in the rest of the world, what advice can you give them to take their fundamental values that they have determined in their organization and not just force feed it to another culture or another geography of the world? And how do you balance that, or what advice do you give a country to move into that territory and do it right, if there is a right? I know it would be situation specific, but are there any general guidelines you could recommend?
Well, firstly, I applaud you to say that they might put a person who looks like you at the top, because they really might. And then how does that go down? You're absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily reflect their own values or their own culture, or or even have them think that this is organic or coming from them, serving them, for them, by them. And so what I find is that let's flip this over and say, well, firstly, has this happened to you? Because you run a huge hedge fund, you invest in many places, you have experienced this firsthand. We could even take a real life example, for example, because what I have found is that if an organization decides what's important to them, but then think about where are they making the product and who are they serving with the product or with the service. So if you're deciding you want to replicate it, let's say in India or in China, and you don't take into account or consideration the culture of the country, what's important to that country, how that country moves, how that country or the people of that country, what they prioritize or emphasize, or what they value, you are going to experience exactly the type of problems that you mentioned. We see it a lot, and we see that sometimes organizations make blind, big, huge investments and have to then roll their sleeves up, change their strategy, change their hiring, and often the people at the top aren't changed, and many faux pas are occurred, and money is lost, and they deem the business unsuccessful. But it didn't have to be that way. It just requires a little bit more sensitivity and a little bit more awareness as to the culture you're going to and the organization that you're creating and where you're creating it, and the people that you're serving and the problem that you're answering or trying to solve. So yeah, if you'd like to share whether that's happened, and maybe we could even look at it, a real life example, that's absolutely fine. Otherwise, that would be my answer.
Yeah, no, I think there are tons of real life examples from a micro scale to a macro scale. The macro being, General Electric, not to pick on them, but puts a new nuclear power plant in India. That's a easy story to reference, and it fails miserably. So the label becomes, we can't do business in India. Well, you can do business in India. You just have to do business differently than you do in Nebraska or New York or Mississippi or wherever. And I'm actually reminded of a very old, very good Michael Keaton movie called Gung Ho, where a Japanese automaker comes to the US and opens a plant. And of course, it's a huge culture clash. That's the whole point of the movie. It's a comedy. It's a really funny movie from the mid-'80s. But what they found and how they all finally determined, not to, spoiler alert for a 30-year-old movie, they found common ground, and then they explored that, and they realized, okay, well, we both, we all care about our families, we all care about community, we all want to be success, and things like that. And on a micro scale, I think you have even the CEOs. I have friends now who are working for companies who have new CEOs coming in, and they're coming from other industries that may or may not understand their particular industries. Just because you were very successful in the toy manufacturing industry doesn't mean you will be very successful in the good old boys network of furniture manufacturing in the United States. So they're really worried about just the lack of understanding from one person, not an entire organization, but from one person. Can this person adapt, or can that person come in and whittle away at what may be wrong or not working? I won't say wrong, but not working in that industry or those particular companies. So I think it's such a broad range of the values that individuals bring and entire companies from their foundations bring. So just after you finish reading the Values Compass, everybody go out and DVR or do a Netflix search for Gung Ho. So pretty funny movie.
Yeah, and if we take that example, actually, I find that a lot with, let's say, Japan and America, or Japan and anywhere. So firstly, if you are deciding you're going to put your management, i.e. either Japanese management or American management, the other way around, right at the top, immediately it irks people. There is no diversity. You've decided that your company, in order for it to have, the values that you've decided it to have, can only come from a person looking like the management in their home country. But that's totally flying in the face of really what a value system is. A value system is in each and every one of us. So to think that it can only come from, I'll take the example of the BBC. Often, right at the top, the leaders will be white, from Britain, male. And when you're dealing with, let's say, the Middle Eastern translation service, or just the stance, just looking at the stance itself, or and you become even more and more micro of the service and the people that you're broadcasting to, then having the management right at the top, or indeed 2 or 3 or 4 layers, to be white, British, male, really doesn't serve, and it doesn't help for diversity. And so we talk about diversity, but if we're not practicing it, it really shows, and it really, I think it almost destroys what we're building before we've even built it. So yeah, I think we do need to get that film out. And it becomes a comedy, but it can easily become a tragedy when lessons aren't learned, right? And I think it also creates a level of disloyalty. It creates problems where there didn't have to be any. Mm-hmm. It's such a simple thing to get right, and if you do, you are miles ahead, and you're leading to profitability. Diversity, equality, inclusion does lead to profitability if it's done with kind of awareness, and if you think everyone has to look a particular way, or espouse even to espouse one particular value set, I would say is problematic. And I know you'd think that I would say the opposite, that I'm trying to say that everyone should sing from the same hymn sheet. But actually, even diversity in values, if I was to take Eelco's question about a risk taker or someone who's adverse to risk vis-a-vis innovation, the combination of the two can still lead to a better product or a better solution, because the world is full of people who are adverse to risk as well as people who stand for innovation, and we want to make our product such that it would suit both of those people and they're both part of your market, rather than just the ones who are innovating or appreciating innovation. A little bit like the Apple, the phone. I have yet to go somewhere in the world where I don't see that logo. And often I see two mobile phones in people's hands in some of the poorest places in the world, where other things might not exist, including their home might be, in whatever state it's in, but those phones will be there. And it's not because they're not in the hands of people who are adverse to risk. It's because they have met the value system of people. And they've thought about the whole entire world as their market and made sure that this item becomes indispensable for all of us, for example.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, Mandeep, how you asked Mike's example. And as I was listening, I actually realized that in my small partnership, we went that route 6 years ago. We got a few guys together. Unfortunately, we don't have women. But having said that, we have a Japanese person in New York, an Indian person in London, an Indian person in Toronto, an Italian in Geneva, and myself in Zurich. And we grouped together around a set of values, what we think is good governance. And that's how we sort of got along. Even though we were not so guided, if you will, by what you've now written there, what you just mentioned, I was sort of recognizing what you were saying, that this was what we did. Not necessarily did I only choose, Dutch males for this at all. Fascinating that you make it so transparent.
Can we dig a little deeper as to why there were no women in the team?
You know what, so part of the governance proposition that we have is that we want to be we wanted to have people that have C-level experience to be able to speak with chief risk officers, chief investment officers, and so on. And two guys in this case I knew from the business, and we got together. We've had a woman somewhere in the middle that didn't work, and not because she was a woman, but because she didn't upheld the principles. We would include a woman, any time of the day, if we find the right persons. And to be honest, there is a lady particularly that I have in mind. I would love her to join us, but she couldn't be bothered. She's painting a house and she's busy. So it's not a gender thing, actually. It's more about cognitive diversity than anything else. But it does center around those values and that you just highlighted. In our case, the values around good governance and the fact that we all came from different locations around the world with our different cultures. That did not matter, actually. It was the values which drove us together, not anything else.
I totally hear you, and thank you for saying that and highlighting that. I do find sometimes we have to push ourselves, though, to get diversity, even though we think we have diversity. So, for example, often I hear we would want women, but we just can't find someone right or not qualified enough. No one actually says that, but they say with the right skill set or with what we need right now. And I would just push back a little and just say, even though that lady was perhaps painting her house, there will be others. And even if they might not have exactly what you're looking for, diversity inherently is the idea of opening up to someone who is different. And I think just having someone of a different gender, just that alone creates this whole different dimension to the governance that you're talking about. And I would push on not just gender diversity, not just ethnic diversity, not just global diversity, as in people from different countries, but also age diversity. Like people who are of you know, we're often thinking about the grey pound or the grey euro, or, you know, we're thinking about these aging populations, even in the case of Japan. But equally, like, you know, having just come from Africa, where 25, or in some countries 21 was the kind of median age or the average age. If we don't have, well, firstly, there is such a huge difference between a millennial and a millennial's world and a 40-year-old's world already, let alone a 60-year-old's world and a 20-year-old's world. So I would just really push, and I'm sorry if that's beeping, I would just push on diversity on all levels, because I find that as much as our value set can be the same no matter where we're from and no matter which gender we are and what age we are, we also want to push ourselves in this domain and push ourselves in the values that we hold.
So when my partnership grows beyond 6 people, I would definitely want to do that. No, I agree. Of course, it's we need that, and it is good. It's good business as well.
Let me jump ahead. We've been having a great conversation, but we're kind of running out of time on our fireside chat. We want to open it up to our other viewers for questions. But one thing I do want to touch on, Mandeep, you mentioned in your book, you've got an exercise in there, turning the values question back from a corporate or group topic to narrowing it down to individuals. You have a questionnaire and an exercise in the conclusion of your book on how to help people identify their own personal values and implement those to build better relationships, be better leaders, make better decisions, and live a more purpose-driven life. Can you walk us through that briefly, and then we'll open it up to questions from everyone else? Just kind of, and everyone should buy the book to do a deeper dive and do that exercise. It's very short. And it works. I've done it and realized some things about myself that I didn't realize that were inherent in my own value system. So, but please, Mandeep, walk us through that as high level as you can, I guess.
Okay, so Michael, you can say if you want to deep dive into what that value was, but I want to just acknowledge both you and Eelco for being so open and for immediately being open about your own kind of situations, the organizations you're sitting in, and the leadership that the organizations have, because right from the get-go, you're willing to question, be open, and think, what more can we do? And that alone, I think, is all that this values compass exercise that we're about to do, that's all it requires. And you both have expressed that attitude and that kind of willingness to question. And so this exercise simply asks you to jump over the lies that we're automatically telling ourselves all the time. And so right from the immediately, it asks you to kind of face yourself either with a good colleague or with a best friend or with a loved one, or to be more honest with yourself than you have been in the past. So to question, what are your values right now, perhaps, vis-a-vis what you wish your values were, your aspirational values. So it strips you back, and the book takes you from the 101 or 102, actually there's a bonus, but all the values in the world, takes you from them and helps you whittle down to your top 20, to what really matters to you. 80% you can check out quite easily because it's important, but not the most important for you. And then that from the 20 to your top 5, that's where you have to question yourself again and again and allow yourself to be questioned, just like you both allowed yourself to be questioned by me right now. And that helps you get down to not only your top 5, but also helps you to prioritize your top 5. So if, for example, you say family is really important, but maybe 75% of your time is actually work. I'm not saying family is not important to you, but would it be the most important value? Or might it be excellence? Might it be being a role model? Might it be responsibility? Might it be another value rather than family? And by really scrutinizing what's important to you, you then naturally think about, well, how am I spending time? Am I spending it according to my value system, or do I want my value system? Do I want my value system to now start shaping how I spend my time? So if you create an aspirational top five values that you've prioritized, then if they're really important to you, might you spend your time slightly differently? So it's a real deep dive, asks you to do kind of a bearing of the soul. Doesn't have to take long, really 15-20 minutes, but it's almost like taking all the thinking right to the beginning of your day, or of your month, or of your year. You set a period of time that you define, and then once you've kind of decided what's important to you, then all the drumbeat of decisions that we make in our life, the little and big decisions, become easier to make because you've decided from the get-go what's important. And this is only for a period of time which you specify. So it could be as you're setting up your organization, or as you join a new governance board, or as you're setting up a new venture, for example. But within a year or 2 years or 6 months, when again you decide, you shuffle the cards again and think, okay, we've met our objectives, or I've kind of completed or tick boxed what's important to me. Now what? Now how has the situation changed? How have I changed, and what's important now? So it's not that you just do the exercise once. You can, depending on what you were doing the exercise for, but equally you can revisit in different scenarios, in different time frames, and in different concentric circles. So you might do this exercise within your organization, but equally you might do this at home with your family, or you might do this within your friendship group, which I've seen a lot. If fun and excitement is important to us, then where are we going to bring it in? Or if fitness is important to us, or health is important, then how are we going to keep one another accountable, for example? So any type of body of people, indeed also for ourselves, just as an individual, you can utilize this exercise in many different ways.
No, that's great. And again, it's quick and it's easy, and it's a pretty deep cut. It's a deep dive, which is usually tough to do in a short amount of time. So I encourage everybody to look into that, and then be reminded of it. As Mandeep just said, don't do it once, but come back to it. That's the problem with so many self-improvement techniques, is that people do them, they're kind of one and done, and you forget about them. And if you just remind yourself to be proactive about those things, and this is certainly one to be proactive about, it only makes things better. So let's be conscious of time here, guys. We want to turn it back over to Navin and let our audience in and ask their questions. So we're a couple minutes past, but I think we're pretty good on time. So Navin.
Thank you very much, guys. So it's a really, really fantastic fireside chat. I'm getting all these comments, people saying, this is amazing, this is fantastic, she's amazing, they're all amazing, right? So thank you so much for all that. And naturally, we've had questions coming in before the Q&A started properly, so I have to go through those. But if you do have questions coming in now, please put it in the message to Nikki, and I'll do my very best to get to all of them while we can. So the first question is from, well, they didn't reveal themselves. And said, you covered this, but could you summarize the simple ways to integrate values that are important to us, identified through your book, into our daily lives?
Yes, I love the fact that you say the person was anonymous, the person who put in the question.
Yes.
They're always the best.
Yeah.
They're always the best.
Yeah. I thought I'd start with that one.
Yeah. I would call that the exercise that I just explained. I would say that it creates like a touchstone, or a credit card, or something that you have in your back pocket. But now, actually, I'm creating, I wouldn't want to say just an app, because everything's an app, but or a game, because everything's a game. But to create something that reminds you, even on your phone as you wake up in the morning, these are the things that you said were important. So let's say that is one way of basically making it so that it's alive, and so that it really does the work that you wish it to do. So if you have decided that health is important, and you're reminded just as you wake up, you had said health was the most important thing, then just how you nourish yourself right from the get-go, how you might put lemon into warm water, you might change your system into an alkaline system so that you then crave sugar less during the day. Indeed, you might slowly find that because you've made a few different changes right to the beginning of your day, that actually how you eat and how your metabolism runs changes completely. And it does over time. And actually quite quickly. I say over time, but these changes happen faster than you think. Or you might decide, I'm going to make sure that I fit in exercise rather than it dragging on and you trying to squeeze it in at 6 o'clock and then it becoming 9 o'clock and then it becoming, and then you're in PM 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock and you still haven't managed to, that you just do it first thing. And again, that will change your metabolism. And again, it will change how you feel about yourself, how you look, how you think, everything. That truly is health. And you have made that your number one priority. You knock it out within the first hour of your day, and then you're free and you don't have to think about it again. That's kind of the power of this work, that you have decided what's important, and then you can easily live by it when that's your number one or your number two.
Right. I'm not sure how anonymous is, but it feels like you're speaking to me as well with that one. And the other question we have is from Miss Lara Quinto Thomas. Hello, Lara. She has 2 questions or 3. She asks, how have you identified a value that has been universal or common to all cultures? And then you go through that one, then I could tell you the other one.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's very lucky that she gets to answer 3. That's great. Hi, Lara.
Yeah, we'll see if we go through all 3. If we can do maybe 1, we'll see.
I'm not trying to shortchange, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Equality. I would say, so one example would be, of course, love is universal, and I wouldn't say only one country, only one set of people or anything like that. And that's not what I'm saying for any one of these values. The aim was not to create a dry textbook that talks about values. The aim was to create something really colorful, something that's storytelling, something that you can see as you walk out of your front door. I wanted it to be really real. And so the way of taking you around the world and showing you different values was simply so that when you arrive in Turkey and you see the hospitality that Turks will naturally shower upon you, you'd say, oh yes, now I can, I relate to that, or I don't, or I can see what she was talking about, or I don't. But much more importantly, it's that it becomes real for you. And I just find that when you can see something and you experience something and you live something, which you will as soon as you flick through this book, and it really, it's like many vignettes. Even if you read one vignette, like let's say Turkey and hospitality, maybe before this conversation, you would have thought hospitality is ubiquitous. In fact, every single nation, as soon as, if I ever have this conversation, and I rarely actually explicitly have this conversation, because normally you can observe a value better than if you ask someone. But if you were to ask, everyone says, oh, hospitality, we're so welcoming, we're so hospitable, like that is our number one value. You would not find, horrible people here. And especially across the Middle East, everyone thinks they're the most hospitable, and they are. But there is the reason why one country almost receives that label or flag or kudos is because you would experience it once you go there. It's not just one of the many things, it's the thing that you will experience and you will live, and you will decide, how moved am I, and do I want to put that into my life and have it such that it shapes my life?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to have to go straight to Anand Asi's question. His was more like a leading in thing. He goes, does value drive culture, or does culture drive a personal value system? And if so, how can shared value truly be achieved in multinational organizations?
Deep question. I like that he wasn't anonymous, and it's a great question. So this is a chicken and egg question almost. And I could cop out and say, well, it's a chicken and egg question. What came first? It's very hard to tell. But my theory is that we as individuals are able to choose our values. So I think that we create our culture as individuals based on our value set. In terms of what we're surrounded by, we are naturally surrounded. We will be born into a family system that will have a certain, certain kind of value system already. We will be prioritizing certain things. We will be born into a culture, into a society. We're all born in countries. We are all born in, either a village or a town or a city that will have a particular value set or a culture set. So I'm not saying that that we're void of culture and that all of this is a choice. I'm saying that you get to a point in your life, 18, 21, when you're able to step back and think, okay, what has been shaping me, and what's important to me now? What do I want to shape me? What do I want to emphasize? Because naturally you will be influenced from the moment you're born. And there are also certain times in your life, normally something will happen when you're 7, something will happen when you're around 13, something will happen when you're, in your late teens. These kind of pivotal moments. If I ask you, what was a moment when you felt as though you didn't belong? I think everyone can think of a time when they felt that they didn't belong in a group, and everyone will think, well, that's because I was this way, and in order to feel like I belong, I then had to become this way. I then had to adopt this value set, because belonging is such an kind of an essential need or want of ours. And that's another thing. All of this is based on it's not just anthropological, or it's not just based on sociology or psychology or physiology. It's based on all those things. And then there's also a level of need and want, and what we want in the long term and what we want in the short term, and what we just, the need for kind of certainty and the need for uncertainty. So all these other layers come into being. But at some point you extract yourself, you think from a spaceship point of view, and then you look down and think, all right, this is what has influenced me. This is nature, this is nurture, and now what?
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Please do.
That's a great point. I think the other side of that coin is also identifying what you don't want. When you see the values that can be, in society, or you're with the wrong friends growing up, or you see it in family members, or whoever it may be, your boss, whoever it may be, and you identify that as like, I don't want to be like that person. So what are my other options to be a better person? So that can be as big a driver to change as what I want. What do I want to be when I grow up, kind of thing? What are the values that I want to embody? All right, well, I don't know. That's a broad question. Like, your exercise helps a lot with that. But if you're 18 years old and or 10 years old and are thinking those thoughts, identifying what you don't want to be can be just as important as what you see and you want to emulate. So just wanted to
Completely, Michael. And I'm really glad that you said that, because this brings me on to another point of, how do you even know what you want or what you don't want? Well, what you don't want is often much easier to identify, because it's really guttural, right? You just feel it. It's not right. What's happening, what you're experiencing, what you see, and you're aware that this is not right. So that kind of level of gut or embodiment, or knowing it in your body and just feeling it, and we know scientifically that that you feel it before you're able to comprehend it, or before you're able to rationalize it, or before it becomes a mind or even a heart thing. It's a body thing first. Equally, that's how you are able to kind of test, what is it that I'm drawn to and what is it that I need to stay away from. So often if a value that's really important to you is violated, you will have a very guttural, immediate reaction. And often you won't be able to you don't want that situation to ever occur again. And then you know it's important to you. And you're right, it's equally important to know what you don't want. So let's say you're lied to. That dishonesty will tell you that integrity or honesty is important to you. So what you don't want will take you closer to what is important or what you do want.
So, Mandeep, if I also can ask a question on this one, does it also mean, and do you know cases of, I would know, but that people actually walk away from jobs or from careers or maybe even from spouses? Because, do you do marriage counseling, by the way? But, you know, because of value issues.
Very much. Actually, I'm going to Eelco. I love that question. I am I'm working with matchmaking. I don't know how else to put it really. It's much more exclusive and high end than matchmaking, but if I was to boil it down, it's matchmaking. I'm working with organizations like this because when we're looking for our life partner, whoever talks about values, in fact, whoever talks about values, full stop, period. Like, we don't talk about it to ourselves. We don't necessarily talk about it. Now we're beginning to talk about it in our organizations. But in terms of finding your life partner, it's probably one of the single most important conversations to have or things to get right. So I'm from an Indian background, and traditionally we would have kind of these informational coffees, right? Like, to get to know one another. Before I actually got married, I was set up on these dates, so as to speak, but a date in which I was expected to know, is it a no? If it's a yes, you might want to meet them again and again. But if it's a no, you're meant to just not lead someone on. You're meant to tell them quite quickly, sorry, this is not going to work out. A quick way to be able to figure out whether you want to go into a relationship with someone, or indeed whether they're your life partner, or indeed whether you're going to marry them. And that's what you're trying to do within this hour-long coffee or whatever. You're just trying to decide, are they your marriage partner? A quick way to get to that successfully is to have this values-based discussion. Then now, let's say we're in the marriage counseling domain. You've married someone. You can't even believe that you've married this person. Their values are so not in line with your values. Is that important? What can you do now? What are the complementary values that aren't the same? What are the values that somewhere must have been the same for you both to have married in the first place? Like, there is this counseling part or this values bridge that can be built. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, the whole point of this is to improve relationships, your relationship with yourself, and therefore your relationship with others too.
Great. Okay, so I'm trying to there's a whole line for questions, right? And they're like somewhat quite reflexive and quite intriguing, and some of the general sort of almost like political things. I'm going to try to maneuver what I can in the next few minutes we have. So there's one question, and it's from a gentleman called Nate. And Nate asks, if a person's values are shaped by the field or industry they're in, for example, hedge funds, VCs, etc., and they're open to being challenged, but only by people from their organizations or field/industry. How do you stand against that? And how do you drive a change from the outside to the inside?
Okay, so if I understood that question correctly, let's say I'm in the finance industry and I'm only willing, so I kind of heard 2 or 3 assumptions in that question. I heard that if they're of that industry, then they have a particular set of values. Maybe I misheard, but that's what I think
it's what Nate is asking, correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, is that his values may be at odds with what's happening in the dominant culture within the VC industry, so to speak, and how he may want to get things going, and how does he reconcile that sort of difference in between, is what I sort of gathered. So yeah.
Yeah. So my friend is asking kind of question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's my question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would question what drew him to that industry in the first place. So let's say in this case, we're talking about venture capital, which actually I know very well because I also led a venture capital fund. I set it up. I recruited people for it. I made the investments for it, and I still invest. And I still think venture capital is one of the most incredibly exciting industries and professions. At least that's how I find it personally. But I absolutely agree. It can feel as though there's a certain type of person or there's a certain type of value set that is valued in that industry. And I would dig deeper, because although I know that space well, and it can feel like that, I also, by asking questions that gave me away a little, but equally scratched beneath the surface of the other, I found that people were much more diverse within that industry than I gave them credit. And that people were there for lots of different motives. And more importantly, that people sometimes were there for a particular motive, but if you scratched a little further, they do hold the other values that perhaps Nate also holds or also thinks are important. So I'll give a kind of a parallel or a tangential example. My career started off in investment banking, and I remember wanting to really think about the kind of impact investing space 20 years ago when there wasn't a term for it, or when people didn't really know it so well. So I was working at JP Morgan, and I had said, why can't we invest in Bluetooth, which was just emerging at the time? I think, and I kind of put up a thesis that Bluetooth was worth investing in because it was a technology that I thought was revolutionary and that I thought could do some real good, and that the investors, as in the private clients that I was helping manage or helping invest for, would feel proud of themselves. And I was told by the lead banker, Mandeep, do you just want to work for do you want to work for our CSR department or our charitable department instead? Because you're thinking way too hard about this. People just want a good ROI, return on investment. Fast forward 20 years. Do I need to be in CSR or do I need to be in charity? No, because people are thinking about ROI, but they're also thinking about the impact that their money can make. And actually the two can go hand in hand, and the two can do really well together, so that those who are investing, I mean, I've seen people now invest in Bluetooth and actually think about, wow, look at the technology of Bluetooth. What else can we invest in? How else can we change the planet through this technology? So I guess what I'm saying is that the world is changing fast. I've seen it change a lot in the last 20 years, and even more so in the last 5 years. And I would just have deeper conversations, or give it time, look for the other people in the industry before discounting yourself or thinking you need to change industry, because there will be space. If you find it exciting, there will be space for you. And if it hasn't caught up with your way of thinking, it will. And you just might have to so-called educate or teach the people around you, or just inform the people around you that there's another way of doing things. Or you step out and create your third way of doing things, and then people will slowly, surely come round to your idea, because there's no way that your idea or your way of thinking is not going to serve other people on this planet. There will be other people who want the same.
Well, Nate, that was a very thorough answer there. I'm thinking I could maybe go on a few, because we're just about coming up to 6 p.m. UK time. No, sorry, 7 p.m. UK time. I'm thinking maybe I could just go on just for a few minutes, no more than 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Sure. Right? Sure. By me, it's fine, as long as it's okay for Eelco and Michael.
Yeah.
No, I'm great.
I think they're okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. So let me try to go 2 more questions. Maybe a bit remiss of me, but okay, let me say, this is maybe my question here. So in Caribbean post-colonial economies, there tends to be a sort of duality where you could have conservative religious and family values influencing choices. And then there's a sort of, in the working world, there's a bit of a nihilism where, for example, you have to say, do things like how do you diversify an economy, how do you transform the way we develop our economy, a transformation in values, right? How would we, in that case, change the values of such economic actors?
So Navin, for me, your audio shifted and changed. I don't know if that was the case for anyone else.
I think your earbuds went dead or something. So
can you hear me okay now?
Yes, yes. Can you repeat it just in a nutshell so that I
Will do. Okay, so in some Caribbean post-colonial economies, there tends to be a sort of duality where you would have conservative religious and family values influencing choices. But then in the working world, how you spend most of your days, it's a sort of nihilism, which may not necessarily look at things like the greater good of how do you be part of things which are going to transform the economy, right? And how do you change the values of such economic actors when really, for instance, in the country I'm in Trinidad and Tobago, is a bit of a crisis, if you will, where they're saying you need to transform the economy, you need to have economic diversification because you've run out of oil and gas and so on, which has driven the economy for 50 to 100 years, depending how you look at it. And now you have to change, but a lot of the economic actors here in this space find it very difficult to change their values and change the way they do business. So how do you deal with that when that sort of almost nihilism is present?
So Navin, firstly, I have to say that when you speak, somehow your culture or your environment even just change the way I feel. Like your accent kind of soothes me, is what I'm trying to say. And so I can see why that you kind of get a sense of this is how are we going to create this change? This is such a not stubborn culture, but it's such an entrenched culture. Now, I had made a promise to myself that in the Values Campus that I didn't include any country that I hadn't had personal experience of. So I have been to each and every one of these 102 countries, but actually I've been to 150. And the first thing we spoke about, Navin, when you reached out to me was, wow, you're speaking to me from Trinidad and Tobago. I've never been there. So that would definitely, that economy and this situation would definitely be in the next edition for sure, because we're correcting it right now. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't answer your question. However, I do feel as though I'm not, that this is not coming from personal experiences, sorry. So you're not unique in the sense that there are many economies that have to make this shift from, let's say, oil and gas into an economy that is for the future, and you're building it for the future. Does this mean that we have to shift our values, or does it mean that we just have to inform certain players or educate certain players about how their world will actually be improved by this shift? So, for example, I used to live and work in the UAE, and Masdar, the Masdar city, one of the most, it's a city that's basically, is such that it's all built on renewable, sustainable resources, even though it's practically floating on oil because the UAE has so much oil. And the way I think that was able to exist and able to be so successful and attract so much investment and interest is because they immediately started to talk to and it's such a new country. The UAE has only been formed, I feel like saying 60 years ago. And Sheikh Zayed, right from the get, really started to speak about how can we make sure that we are relevant in the future. In fact, that we're leading the future. And in fact, that we are, that we're really serving our children and our grandchildren in the world that we're creating. And so then, you're able to show how the alternative fuel systems that you're creating are going to lead you to greater success, greater wealth, greater livelihood for or the population and the up and coming, you know, the generations. And I think that is really what we're talking about here, rather than a shift in values. However, I have to say that I don't know, because I haven't been, so I stand to be corrected.
You have to come to the Caribbean and do some research here, maybe for your next book. I think you get some interesting fodder here in this part of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also wonder whether we're talking about a generational shift too.
I mean, I could get into a whole thing here, but I know we're pressed for time, but there's something that's very different about the Caribbean space compared to many different countries, right? Which may inform the value systems here.
Mm. And it's interesting, you talked about kind of inside the home versus outside the home. And, you know, I can see where we're dealing with a complex situation. So yes, that's going to be in the next, we'll have to do this all over again.
Yeah, sure. Okay, look, well, thank you so much, Mandeep. You've been really, really wonderful. I mean, you've been getting so many comments in the chat, people just really praising the book, the people have read the book, they're praising you, they're praising your engagement with everyone. It's been really fantastic. I want to thank everyone involved for helping to put this together, especially our members of the Fireside Chat, Dr. Eelco Fiole and Michael Williams, our president. Laura, New Jersey Business School, everyone else behind the scenes. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. And thank you again to Mandeep. And I wish you all have a very good evening.
Thank you very much. I just want to say I took the whole fireside thing very seriously. We've been next to a fire the whole entire time. And really thank you for having me, firstly, but also thank you for the opportunity, but thank you for all the thought that yourself, Eelco, Michael, Laura, everyone, and Nikki for putting all the questions together, all the thought that you as a team have put into this. It really showed, and it actually got me really excited because it shows me different dimensions too. And the fact that you were also open, it makes this work worth doing.